So welcome to our Network Operations Subcommittee Working Group 3 annual update. I'm Derek DiGiacomo, the SCTE Senior Director of Energy Management Programs and Business Continuity for SCTE. Our session today is focusing on what does business continuity mean for our industry as cable providers and broadband providers. You know, with the advent of the 10G program, reliability is one of those four pillars, and business continuity certainly plays an important role in that important pillar. So in today's session, we're going to look at what this awesome working group part of our standards program has been doing over the past year and hear from the experts that frequently join our program week after week to help develop standards, best practices, and share information for the industry. So speaking of our working group, here's the highlights of who frequently attends. And the people in italics, Robert, Tom, Jennifer, and Jesse will be presenting with me on this panel today. The purpose of our working group, again, will highlight the creation of standards and operational practices. That's typically what they do as part of our standards program. We will look at the business continuity information share, like recent hurricane events and other impacts to our standard operating procedures in Blue Sky. And then lastly, we're an interface to the Department of Homeland Security, and notably the Shares Radio program, which I will highlight briefly on today's session. And I would be amiss to not highlight our chair of the working group, Jim Shortle, who is with Cox Enterprise as the executive director of the Enterprise Business Continuity Program for Cox. Believe it or not, this working group has been around since 2013. And here are the milestones that the team has achieved. So first, in green are the Expo sessions. You know, we wanted to be in person. This year, unfortunately, that was not the case. So in green, we show the number of things that we've highlighted over the years on the show floor or in a session like this. So everything from bringing some of the leaders from Department of Homeland Security in with us to publishing best practices around COVID. We discussed that at length last year for obvious reasons, to bringing demonstrations like refueling stations to the show floor. In addition to that, we've published a number of best practices and standards. Those are highlighted in that brownish color there, and there's a number of those that you can download freely at the scte.org website. So those are some of our highlights and milestones that this team has done over the years. A lot of success. One of the more enjoyable projects, they were all enjoyable. This one in particular, I loved to be able to see the technology come to life, is this charging trailer that the Cox team took delivery of after the New Orleans event 2 cycles ago when we were in New Orleans. So the team worked together along with, at that time, Alpha Technologies to spec and build the community connector, which provided power and vital comms during times of incident. So this was a huge success. It was a fun project to work on, and hopefully next time we're in person, we'll be able to see the next generation of this community connector trailer that Cox has possession of, or maybe one of the other operators' demonstrations as well. Another highlight that the team has published to date is the Stonecut cable project, and this has certainly come full circle, and we've gotten a lot of miles out of this in recent history, largely because of hurricanes like Ida and others that impacted the East Coast largely and some of the other areas. But basically, this is a communications vehicle or communications resource that you can use when you're building relationships with OEMs, the Offices of Emergency Management, local officials, and others that could impact the restoration efforts during time of need. So if you do a simple Google search for SCTE emergency management, that will give you the access to an essential PDF file that you can send, print, leave behind, and promote, as well as a YouTube video that Tom Adams from Charter did the voiceover work for us to help raise the importance and awareness of cable operators needing a place at the table in advance of a storm, during the storm, and then post-storm, to make sure that things happen as smoothly and as effectively as they possibly can. Because we all know that our services are growing in importance. Things like essential cellular backhaul, E911, and emergency services before, during, and after the storm is vital and carried on our networks. So that's an important resource. The other thing that we will look at here briefly is the Department of Homeland Security Shares HF radio program. The Shares radio program is administered by the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, out of the National Coordinating Center for Communications, or NCC, and it provides an additional means for users with a national security and emergency preparedness mission, like our cable operators that are on the call today. And really, it's the line of last defense for communications when all other traditional landline and cellular communications are impacted by either natural or man-made disasters. So basically, you have no phone, no cell phone, no, who uses fax, but no fax, no email. The only thing we have is HF radio, and that's coordinated through the US government to help make sure that we can restore things as clean and as quickly as possible with our participating partners in the communications and critical infrastructure space. So those are some of the highlights. I wanted to take a few minutes to introduce and set the stage for exciting presentations. Now we're going to transition into each of my respective panelists to present their own ideas and topics. And we'll begin first with Joe Vines with Charter Communications. We'll let that slide come up, Joe. Following Joe will be Jesse and Jennifer, and then Tom, and then Robert, and then we'll have a couple of pointed questions as we wind down our late afternoon session. So Joe, if you're seeing the slides, you can prompt me for next slide change, and I'll turn things over to you for your intro and take it away.
Great, thank you, Derek, and greetings, everyone. Joe Vines, I'm with Charter Communications. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs, work in our Washington, D.C. office. I'm also a 38-year veteran of the cable industry, with over half of that being in field operations. So go ahead, and Derek, if you want to advance the slide, that'd be great. So I wanted to give you kind of a reference point to how we, or the communication sector in general, organizes itself with the federal government. In more specifically, the Department of Homeland Security. DHS and CISA, which is the Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency, is the communication sector specific agency, or SSA. And the way that we've organized ourselves is there's 5 segments to the communication sector. We've got broadcast, cable, wireless, wireline, which is your traditional kind of POTS line, although most of the wireline companies do VoIP and other things similar to what cable does, but they're the local exchange carriers as well. And then finally, satellite. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, there's 3 connection points where our sector engages. So if you look at NSTAC, which is in the upper left there, that's the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. So this committee works closely with the administration and coordinates with DHS and the administration to look at specific topic areas that impact the communications sector, and then advises on them. Unfortunately, we do not have a cable company that is a member of NSTAC, but who knows, maybe someday we will have a cable company on the NSTAC. Second is the Communications Sector Coordinating Council, and that's kind of the planning arm of the sector, and it brings together the comm sector, industry members, both associations and companies, and much like NSTAC, will look at specific topic areas of concern, cyber risk management, supply chain risk management, and so on and so forth. And then work collaboratively with both the sector industry members, organizations, and government agencies, both DHS, DOD, and other agencies as well, administration as well. So thirdly is the communication ISAC. which is extremely operational in nature. And I'm going to focus my talk today on that. It's organized under the FEMA designated Emergency Support Function 2. We are one of about 16, and it depends on where you are in the country, how many actual ESFs or emergency support functions there are. But we are number 2, and we are designated as a lifeline sector, which is one of about 7, I believe, that have that designation. So power would be one of them, water and others like that. So this is a public-private partnership that's been in existence for over 40 years, or nearly 40 years, I should say. We organize, we plan, respond, and recover with the mindset of national security and emergency preparedness. I'm actually the current chair of the NCC Communications ISAC. I'm in my 5th 2-year term as a COM ISAC leader for our partnership. And more specifically, this partnership provides for a single point of contact for the whole of government. So if we need to leverage the Department of Transportation for various issues like waivers for weight restrictions for our trucks and things like that, we can go through our partners at CISA and the NCC, National Coordinating Center for Communications, to do that. But why don't we go ahead and proceed with the next slide, Derek? Okay, so again, I talked about national security and emergency preparedness. Some of the programmatic engagements that we have with CISA and DHS and the FCC, quite frankly, are, as Derek mentioned, the SHARES high frequency radio program. I just want to take a minute to compliment Mark Zubin and Derek DeGiacomo from SCTE for their continued support and leadership with the SHARES radio program. Derek has done, under his leadership, has done a phenomenal job of bringing our cable sector into fold with this radio program. And we have several MSOs that actively support and committed to this, both financially through the investment of the radios, and then time and expertise with implementing this radio program. I'm also proud to say that the cable sector convenes and leads a monthly test of the shared radio program. And that's a lot of credit to Derek for helping to run that and keep that moving forward. So thank you, SCTE, and more specifically, Mark Zubin and Derek DeGiacomo on that. Some of the other things that we're engaged in are priority telecommunication services. GETS is a government emergency telecommunication service, which is essentially a priority service that folks that have a national security mission, whether it be industry or government, can take part in and be able to have priority telecommunication services during emergency. So when you get a fast busy signal, your call would be placed in priority as a member of the GETS program. Wireless priority service, same thing, but that works with wireless cell phones and so on and so forth. So again, priority service. I'm going to flip over to the right side of the screen. You're going to see telecommunications service priority. That's a provisioning service that is set up and administered by DHS and CISA under the emergency comms division within CISA, with a hierarchy authority of the FCC, Public Safety Bureau. And essentially what that provides for is the ability for a company or an agency that has a national security mission to be able to apply for priority telecommunications service, say it's a circuit, for the communications companies to provision either on an installation, a scheduled installation, or during an emergency to get that service up and running, and that gets put up ahead of the other priorities that communication companies have. So that has to be approved by CISA. You have to meet qualifications, and then that's sent over to the communication companies. I believe all of the cable companies, or the major MSOs anyway, are part of the all three of these programs: GETS, WPS, and TSP. We'll go back over to the middle, and you've got FEMA Regional Emergency Support Function 2. Again, that's the comms designation. We engage with our FEMA regional partners in training and exercises throughout the year. There's an annual spring conference that we're actually planning right now. That's going to be in North Carolina. And the comms industry partners will be engaged along with our government partners, both CISA, CISA Regional, and the FEMA regions under ESF 2. During an emergency, there are a couple of coordinating centers that FEMA will man, communication ESF 2 personnel. At the national level here in Washington, D.C., there's a National Response Coordination Center, and that group is there to take in, monitor a significant incident when it's stood up, monitor the situation, and again, leverage the government to help in response and some support to get critical communications back up and working. Industry is able to directly request support for specific issues from the NRCC, and very similarly with the regional response coordination, that's within the region, kind of on the ground. They are working closely with the state emergency management, local emergency management agencies, and the other ESF2s, similar to what the National Response Coordination Center does. So as I mentioned, all 16 ESFs for a major event like Ida, Katrina, 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, these centers will be activated, and industry has the ability to work closely with FEMA and request assistance if necessary. As we go down, we'll touch up, go back to the previous slide, Derek. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. I thought that flipped. So the FCC, Public Security Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. We also work closely with them. This is the non, I don't want to say regulatory, but it's not the enforcement bureau. This particular bureau works collaboratively with industry, with CISA, with FEMA, to support the mission and really support industry, because we own and operate over 85% of the critical infrastructure in the nation, communications infrastructure. So they coordinate with us during significant events, before, during, and after. They're also involved in these training sessions and exercises that I mentioned. We also work closely with significant issues associated with comms, or that can impact comms, like electromagnetic pulse, EMP. I'm not going to get into all the details, but that particular one is sensitive. It's what I like to describe as a low probability and high consequence scenario. PNT, position, navigating, and timing, and solar storms. We recently had a briefing on solar weather from our partners at CISA, which was very helpful. And we will be going into a classified session on the same an electric magnetic pulse in the near future. So Derek, why don't we flip over to the next slide? So from a tactical perspective, how we engage, you look over to the left, these are both cyber and physical events. And I didn't put SolarWinds in here, but we should add SolarWinds. The Microsoft breach, public safety, telephone denial of service, SS7, Mirai bot, NotPetya, Vodafone, Ukraine, GitHub exposure are some of the recent events that we have collaborated with CISA on, and we get information from CISA and in turn provide information through the ISAC to CISA. For a physical event, we're national security emergency preparedness. So our mission is to keep emergency services up, the 911 centers. Some of the recent events are Hurricane Ida, Katrina, Superstorm Sandy in Puerto Rico, where we're directly involved with CISA through the NCC to provide ground truth and provide any unmet needs that we might have. Wildfires is another significant issue. There are wildfires currently happening out on the West Coast that are impacting some of the cable companies as well, and have impacted throughout the year. So those are some of the physical events. CISA also through the NCC has an emergency response group. The current members of that group are AT&T, Charter, Lumen, T-Mobile, and Verizon. And essentially what this group does on a really bad day, these companies will devolve to an alternate location with the government and having communication back to their organizations. The mission is to help maintain the continuity of communications in support of continuity of government for the nation. So that's another program. Some of the things that we've been involved in and work closely with our system partners on are the emergency wireless protocol, which is primarily for the wireless companies, but essentially it provides a process or a plan that can be executed during a significant event like the Boston Marathon bombing. One of the concerns during that event was whether or not the bad guys would have the ability to detonate another bomb utilizing a wireless device, and therefore necessitating the need to potentially, and this didn't happen despite news reports, the need to shut off the wireless towers. So extremely important to have that plan in place, to understand the mechanics of it, for the government to understand what the impacts of something like that could be on commerce, and on just the idea of folks being able to dial 911 and get emergency services if you shut off a wireless tower. We also plan for and work closely with DHS and CISA on epidemics and pandemics. So the two most notable ones are what we're going through right now, which is COVID-19. And if you remember the H1N1, CISA has provided support to us, and letters and recommendations to the states to help us with access issues and other things. Some of the other things quickly that we engage on are national security, special events, and essentially an NSSE is when there's a head of state involved. So a Super Bowl is actually a SEER event, but if the president's at the Super Bowl, that becomes a NSSE. UN General Assembly, the presidential conventions and inaugurations, State of the Union, and a Pope visit are some of the examples of those things. So we work closely with the government to ensure there's continuity of communications during these events. So Derek, why don't we go to the next slide? So here are the things that we are concerned about and that we let the government know that we may need help with, and we plan for these things. So fuel is a necessary component to our ability to do restoration. We need priority on the distribution of fuel. We need to be connected to the state fuel plans. FEMA oftentimes will surge fuel into an area and provide that through the Stafford Act to the states. The FEMA, except in very extraordinary circumstances, cannot provide the fuel directly to industry. So they advocate on our behalf with the states, and we lobby the states directly, request the fuel when we need it. Access. So oftentimes there are roadblocks that the police use to limit the public from accessing a impacted area. We need sometimes the assistance of CISA and the federal government to influence the state and local authorities to provide us access. I mentioned earlier that oftentimes we will ask DHS to work with DOT on getting waivers so we can get our trucks into particular areas, and weight restrictions and drive time restrictions and so on and so forth. So those are another way that we leverage the government for that. Security, we all lived through the riots of 2020 and the civil unrest. Sometimes it's necessary for us to either get local police, federal or National Guard to help us both protect our people, fuel, and other items. And then the fourth one that hasn't historically been part of the top three, I think is a top four, and that's the help of the federal government to work with DOE and the power companies to provide estimated times of a repair on electrical restoration that we so highly depend on, the prioritization of the restoration, locations of power crews so we can meet with them and work with them collaboratively and follow them into the area. And as soon as they're done restoring power, we can get in and quickly get our services back up as well. So those are really the top four things that we ask assistance of our federal partners. We'll go to the next slide. So one of the tools that has been used and provided to industry are fuel access and debris removal letters. The fuel letter is a courtesy letter from CISA that is provided to our folks in the field to be able to hand to a official on the ground. And essentially it's a courtesy letter. The federal government has no authority to tell the state and locals to do anything, but it talks about, all three of these letters actually talk about the importance of communication and lifeline communication in the critical infrastructure area. We also get in addition to access, we get a letter that we can use to provide to local officials about debris removal, and to let them know that if you cut a cable, you could be cutting all of the public safety and emergency communications to a particular area, and really thwart the overall response by doing that. We have experienced too many cuts as a result of debris removal, and it's a big issue within our industry, and we've worked closely with our local, state, and federal government partners to make awareness of this problem, in addition to power companies, make them aware to be more careful and not cut our cables, fiber, and so on and so forth, because that can be a secondary disaster and really slow down the restoration time. Let me go to the next slide. So this is like the one that we produced, this committee, the SNOS Working Group produced. This was a one-pager that was completed, developed by a Tiger team that was led by the FCC Public Safety Bureau, CISA, FEMA, and other state agencies down in Louisiana, and then industry, of course. So if you look at these, this is a one-page document that was sent out, produced and sent out within 48 hours, which is, my understanding, is unprecedented by DHS, a federal agency, to get something released and okayed. And if you look at these pictures, many of them are pictures that we supplied because cable and the wireline sector are impacted greatly by cut cables. So we're continuing to advocate with our federal, state, and local government agencies who are responsible for debris removal, and continuing to educate them. And we also work closely with the power sector and Edison Electric Institute, which is their major trade association, on the development of education and awareness tools to try to prevent fiber cuts before, during, and after major incidences. So Derek, with that, I think that concludes my slides. If you have questions at the end, please send them in, and I will pass the baton to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for the overview with working with the government. Again, as Joe mentioned, use the online chat function to queue your questions for Joe, which we'll field at the end, time permitting. So thank you, Joe, for that awesome overview, and thanks for the plug about Shares. It's a great program, and if you want to get involved with Shares, please reach out to me after this event, and I'll be happy to do a deeper dive on the Shares program itself. So without further delay, let's welcome Jennifer and Jesse, both with Cox Communications, to the main stage. They're shifting gears a little bit, and they're looking at runtime importance in the face of climate change and the pressures that it's putting on doing business as cable operators. So Jesse, Jennifer, please introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks, Derek, and thanks everybody for having us. I'm Jesse Lax, one of the business continuity specialists at Cox Communications, and 2 weeks from today is year number 18 for me here in this industry. Jennifer, you want to say hi real quick?
Yeah, hello, I'm Jennifer Champlin with Cox Communications. I'm a business continuity specialist alongside Jesse. We're a little geographically spaced, but that's all right. He's over in Virginia and I'm in San Diego, California. About this time last month was my 11th year with Cox Communications.
Yep. All right, well, we can jump in and get started. Derek, if you want to hit the next slide for us there. So I'll get things started, and then I'll hand things over to Jennifer. And, you know, climate change is a word I think we've all heard before, and probably recently, and probably in years past as well. And the first thing that we want to start off with is we wanted to, just kind of more or less change your mindsets a little bit. At least for me, when I hear the word climate change, the first thing I immediately think of is sea level rise. We see a lot of, media attention and coverage, seeing, the polar ice caps and, so forth melting and breaking away. And sea level rise is the easy one. But we also want to kind of challenge you to think beyond sea level rise. For example, one of the things you might think about is what ambient air temperature looks like. If you kind of think back to the hottest day that you dealt with this summer, and you think back and go, that was a really hot day. But now kind of amplify that a little bit, push your brain out 25 years, 30 years, 50 years, and say, could we withstand days like that one that you thought of, but over longer periods of time and even hotter conditions? Or flip it the other way. Think back to the, this past winter, one of the coldest days that you dealt with before, and same scenario. Could you deal with, less light during the daytime, but even colder temperatures? So those are kind of some of the things that we're thinking about when it comes to climate change, in addition to sea level rise. But ambient air temperature, of course, is a big one. Now, if you do have some of those longer and hotter days and we don't get enough rain, as you heard Derek and Joe mention, about the risk of wildfires. If we've got a lot of hotter days ahead of us and we don't have the ability to cool off either by the rain or by other things, that's going to increase our drier conditions, and that's going to amplify the potential for wildfires. Or if you've got, plenty of rain coming your way, then maybe you have too much rain, then you're potentially dealing with the increased risk of flash flooding or of nuisance flooding on top of all that. And then even about thunderstorms. I'm not sure about, everywhere that the audience is today, but in my part of the world in Virginia, I know when the summertime comes around that the thunderstorms do pick up, but at least from my perspective, it kind of feels like they're getting a little bit more severe every year. You tend to see more lightning, you tend to see more wind, you tend to see more rain, and the violence of the storms is also kind of increasing. And then the final thing we'll kind of challenge you to think about too is, with those greater days, the hotter days, the colder days, the, increased rain, increased lightning, you name it. Think about what your organization's dependency is on energy. Specifically, it could be solar, it could be fossil fuels, or it could just be good old fashioned electricity, or even all the way down to batteries. Are those particular sources that you get your energy from good for the next 25 years, 50 years, 100 years? So one of the things that we've done is we've really, looked to partner with a third-party group that we kind of consider to be our trusted resource, not only to help us obtain climate change data, but also ways to incorporate it into our current business models, and actually how to create some, actual business plans, based off of that information. And, one of the things that Jennifer and I have always been very prideful of is that a lot of our leadership at Cox makes decisions at a generational level, meaning some of the things that we are looking at and talking about, as of today, are going to be decisions that get made for the next 100 years down the road. So Derek, if you hit the next slide for us there. So you heard me mention a trusted resource, and the company that we're working with is AccuWeather for Business. They didn't pay me to say that. That's truly just coincidentally what we came to. But one of the things that I'm sure your eyes have caught is that that graphic to the left there. And let me first explain what it is that you're looking at. So this is some of their climate change data. And what you're looking at is over the span of the next, say, 90 or so years in 5-year increments. So you'll notice that, like, right underneath the word year up there, you can see the years kind of advancing 5 years at a time. And what it's showing you is their system's best case prediction on days that are going to exceed 90 degrees. So like if your eyes are over top of certain portions of Texas, you'll notice that down there towards the bottom that number keeps getting bigger. Meaning in that year, that's how many days there are going to be a temperature of 90 degrees or hotter. So obviously looking at this, it's a little sobering, because you can see if you're in a certain portion of the world there that it's going to get hot, and it's going to get hot a lot longer. And one of the things that we're looking and thinking about is like our operations, more on the West Coast, like in Las Vegas or in Phoenix, Arizona. In certain times of the year there today, it gets so darn hot that, mailboxes and trash cans melt on the sides of the streets. I can actually recall a day or two, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, where it was so hot that they grounded all the flights because the air was not thick enough for the planes to gain enough velocity to lift off the ground. So, you're going to have hotter days ahead. That's one thing that we're definitely seeing, but we're also thinking about what we like to call our 3 Ps. We call those people, property, and plant. So when we think about our people being outdoors in, Phoenix, and 224 days of the year, it's going to be beyond 90 degrees. That's just weather that, human beings just really aren't built for. And it's going to be a little bit more than just saying, be sure to drink plenty of water. It may even go as extreme in some cases of where we say, maybe during the peak heat of the months, we don't do work during the day. Maybe we do work at night. Maybe we look at ways to provide additional shade or some kind of additional out of the box way to keep folks a lot cooler than we have in the past. Without your people, you really truly can't do anything with your business or with your operations. They are truly the lifeline of a company. So we're also trying to think of additional ways to try to keep people safe as the day's starting to get hotter and hotter. With our facilities, you heard me mention people first, then followed by property. Think about the way your facility is equipped today. If you're in an extreme hot or extreme cold situation, is your boiler or your air conditioners suited, today to keep your facility heated and cooled? But now amplify that a little bit, add an extra 50 or 100 days on top of what you're used to now. Can your air conditioners or heaters work running 20 plus hours a day at 100% capacity for upwards of 6 months at a time? So thinking about things like that, would you need to add additional air conditioners, add additional energy conservation needs, lots of things, to think about. And then of course, finally with our network, our network is our backbone of what keeps folks connected next to our people. So if we've got plant, that runs up and down the streets, either above the ground or below the ground, is that plant been engineered in such a way that it can withstand, additional days of 50 or 100 degrees temperatures? Do we have enough batteries to be able to withstand sitting inside a cabinet enclosed in that type of heat? So again, lots of questions to think about. Or, beyond that too, is there even a way just to bury the plant, try to at least try to get it out of the elements as much as possible, which, sounds easy, but, there's obviously a lot of permits and a lot of fees associated with that. And there's just some areas you just can't flat out bury things in. So I left you with a lot of questions to think about there, I know, I'm sure. But I'll switch gears and let Jennifer take over for a minute, and she'll talk to you a little bit about the partnerships that we formed.
Thank you, Jesse. So, Jesse covered some of those operational challenges that we may face in the coming months, years, or even decades to pass when it comes to global climate change and those pressures that we'll see on the runtime of our greater communications network. But it's also equally important to speak to how we'll use climate change modeling here at Cox as part of our corporate responsibility of being a good partner. So Cox Conserves is our sustainability program that we've had for over a decade. It really continues to be our driving force, not only in our day-to-day operations, but again, as Jesse mentioned, how we plan for future sustainability across generations. And we operate our business in ways that reduce our impact, and we encourage our employees and suppliers and partners or even customers to do the same. And so we conserve natural resources by adopting, renewable forms of energy or enhancing the efficiency of our operations, whether it's the runtime on our fleet or reducing the number of truck rollouts that we have. Improving our facilities, like Jesse mentioned, to save on energy or reduce waste. That's just a couple of the ways that we look to our Cox Conserves to kind of look at that resiliency generationally. And so obviously we have the usual goals of, zero waste to landfill by 2024 or being carbon and water neutral by 2034. And we invest in a lot of sustainability and conservation projects to meet those aggressive goals for Cox Conserves because they're really no small feat. But again, by partnering with experts in the field of climate change, paired with that sustainability initiative through Cox Conserves, we can lead to building a more resilient and reliable network, especially in the face of increasing weather events. So really, by looking at the modeling that Jesse shared with you, like on the previous slide, we take that information that we look at today to influence those decisions tomorrow and over the next generations. Ultimately, we want to leave the Earth in a better state than we found it. Here at Cox, we empower our people to build a better future for the next generation. Again, whether it's retrofitting some of our admin or our technical facilities with alternative energy sources like solar or wind, looking at those impacts, like Jesse mentioned, with regards to your HVAC systems. Is it going to meet the capacity needs when you're talking about the needs for extreme cooling or heating under those temperatures? Any strain that we can pull off the grid to reduce what we're impacting, it really makes it easier for our energy partners to deliver that critical energy in those times of need. So not only does our energy procurement team benefit from the modeling when we're sourcing sustainable energy and materials, but if you look at our facilities and real estate team, where they're purchasing our physical assets, right, where they're placing us, and you look at that global climate change modeling, they can really make some wise decisions over the next 50 years. Not to mention our Cox automotive partners, how they manage our fleet. Sometimes that's running around the clock operations for what we consider those significant business disruptioning events like Hurricane Ida. So when you think about Ida, and you think about all of the utility and communication infrastructure that's damaged, our team of construction, our network engineers, our planners, they can look at that, what climate change modeling refers to as days of business disruptions, and ultimately navigate where they engineer our plant, whether that be aerial or underground. So, folks, we're not the only ones thinking about how we can sustain through disruptive events like adverse weather or public safety power shutoffs, the rolling brownouts that we see increasing year over year, or even a major Cat 4 hurricane like Ida. But the customers are solutioning in their homes as well to be able to withstand these type of events. So as the customers become more adaptive through these disruptions, whether it be solar technology or power banks like the Tesla wall or that good old fashioned generator, there's just that expectation that our network is going to be as resilient. And so as our community's been working or even learning from home during the pandemic, it also shows us that we have a responsibility as a good partner to think generationally when it becomes a network resiliency, and how we mitigate through these impacts and how we build more reliability into that network. Alternative energy, like adding additional power supplies to our nodes or investing in enhancing solar technologies so those technologies can be more useful in the field for us. Conserving materials and resources, so designing smarter ways that we build our plant so that where we place our assets, that rebuild and recovery is minimized. Even placing that node 10 feet further inland, right, from that rising sea level. So in light of COVID, we've already reimagined how we do business. And by folding in another level or layer of depth into our thinking and planning with climate change, we're going to be able to retain that agility to flex and adapt as our customers do and as our communities do. So like Jesse mentioned, we might be reimagining how we do business by shifting our people resources to working those overnight hours in those high Southwest summers, or even using more technology like our virtual tech assist with Help Lightning during a deep freeze in the extreme cold in the Northeast where our technicians aren't out in the field during the day. They're just a few of the ways that we're thinking about how we can use this type of intelligence in climate modeling to influence those decisions. We wanted to use this session to kind of spark those interests in that creative thinking. Jesse mentioned we leave you with a lot of questions, but it's really to just inspire you, empower you to build a better future for the next generation. So that's what Jesse and I have. Thank you, Derek, and we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jesse and Jennifer. That was an excellent setup for Tom, who's going to be talking about one of the issues that could be as a result of this climate change that you guys are starting to analyze. And I really feel that we could take a deeper dive, and you set a really good stage for maybe the next 12 months to zero in on analyzing this and how much impact it could possibly have as this for us as an industry. So thank you for taking that time and giving the overview. So without further delay, Tom, what is this public safety plan shutoff stuff that's going on out west? Can you walk us through an overview of what's going on and how it's impacting Comcast?
Sure, Derek. Appreciate the invite for today and the ability to represent Comcast today. My name's Tom Smith. I'm the Senior Corporate National Security and Emergency Preparedness Manager for Comcast. Been in the industry about 22 years in the battlefields during events, whether it be hurricanes, wildfire, and everything else. So what is this, like Derek says, what is this thing called PSPS? It was first came about in California, and PSPS stands for the Public Safety and Power Shutoff. And basically it's brought in mostly the fact of public safety, necessary to turn off electricity during very high, dry, windy conditions or low humidity. That increases the wildfires, especially in the California region and the western part of the region. Because of the low humidity, severe vegetation and everything else, the government decided that we should go into this program called PSPS to minimize the impact to the wildfires or the risk of creating a wildfire throughout the state. So they come up with a regulation. Regulation, what does it include? It requires, the cable and the communication industry to have 72 hours of backup, lithium batteries versus the lead batteries that we have, and minimize the use of gasoline and diesel generators to, mitigate any types of sparks or anything else that may create a wildfire. And part of the other thing is partner with the Cal Operations of Emergency Services during these types of events, embed a Comcast or a cable or communication representative into the local emergency operations center, and also provide data and locations of potential PSPS events, customer impact, more directly at the electric industry for that. Again, like Jesse and Jennifer talked about, transition to renewable generation for backup power. So they are also looking for forward leaning to, going to those types of alternative resources. There's also, you need to file a communications resiliency plan with the state, and as well as have a public communication requirement. How do you reach out to your customers during the PSPS, whether it be social media or simple thing as email or text, whatever the case may be, and have emergency operations plans for your company and how they're going to respond to not only just a public safety power shutdown, but during any type of man-made and natural events, whether it be earthquakes, hurricanes, wildfires, etc. Next slide. How does it work? Basically, the electric industry is required to notify their customers within 48 to 72 hours. In some cases, you only get 24 hours in advance of a power safety, where they will purposely shut down the power for a particular period of time. Most of the times they can pinpoint it by zip code, but sometimes they do go down to the street level or county level to make sure that we have. How long does a public safety power shutoff last? Typically almost 2 days on average, but we've seen it extend to about 6 to possibly 7 days, depending again upon weather conditions and everything else during the climate that the power company is looking at. Next slide, please. Here's a typical process that the power companies will use. I won't say which one it is, but they basically look up as much as a week ahead of what the weather forecast may look like, and what time frames, what they're doing, and what tasks they're going to be taking in advance of that weather. And it could be, 1 day before you go into a warning, notifications, and they notify if you are in the area of potential, public safety power shutdown. and in some cases, we may consider them rolling blackouts because they don't stay in one area. They may alternate to different areas of different counties for potential shutdown for a period of time. Next slide, Derek. And once the power is shut off, obviously, right after that, it's a requirement that the power company has to go back out and re-inspect where they shut down, make sure that everything's intact and there's not any potential transmission of an electrical spark or anything else to further impact the area and make sure that we minimize the potential of a wildfire, etc. So by that, the public company has to send their crews out and inspect the lines, just like we would do during our assessment line after a storm in the communication industry. But also, basically power is restored within 24 hours. So you had 2 days on average. Now you got another 24 hours for the impact as far as, getting the power back on and restored in a safe environment. So not only that the public's safe, but our employees, especially our techs who may be out in that area, are in a safe condition that they can go back, go to any of our lines and make the necessary repairs. Next slide, please, Derek. Operational impact, a huge impact. I mean, basically, most of our communications industries have the lead battery systems in there. Converting over to a 72-hour battery, lithium battery, it's not only time consuming, but it's a financial impact that I'll talk in the next slide. What about lithium batteries? They're sensitive to high temperatures, so that have some wear and tear on the batteries. If they're completely discharged, you can't recharge them again. And lithium batteries last 2 to 3 years in some cases, in most cases, according to the manufacturers, it was where the lead batteries may be 6 to 8 years. So there's a little bit of an operational impact. One of the other things that Joe brought up, which is very important, especially in the operational part of things that I really haven't mentioned here, is the coordination with the power companies. This is going to have a huge impact on how we coordinate our efforts. Right now in the United States, like Joe said, there's 3,500 plus investor-owned electric companies that we need to coordinate, whether it be a PSPS event or any type of a weather-related event that we need to coordinate. So just imagine the resources you have to have, that coordination, the close coordination of when they're restoring their services, when we can get into an area when it's safe to do so for our employees to restore their services. Also, a part of that whole part of operation was the awareness. I mean, we not only have to provide awareness to the power companies on the importance of getting the communications lines back up, but also to our customers. When are we going to be back up in line and have them understand what's going on as far as, the process of the protocol I just mentioned, that, there's a 24-hour period after that the electric company's out there inspecting that we can't, go back out there and repair anything. We may not have to, but, just to make the awareness. But also during the event, if a line were to be severed in some way, it's going out there and educating the Department of Public Utilities, the National Guard, or anything else about don't cut the fiber, like Joe mentioned in his presentation. That, for example, in Ida, in the hurricane situation, I know they were close to at least 200 cuts throughout the industry, if not more, whether it be our wireline, our wireless providers, or anything else. But it's a very, very important program that we have to go out there and create awareness to those government entities as well as the power companies. Next slide, please. What's the financial impact? Millions of dollars invested in battery backup systems. So, when we first, put out our plant, we based it on lead batteries. Now the transition over to lithium batteries. The cost to convert that system, obviously you have to have third-party contractors or in-house contractors that would have to do that. But not only that, is you have to reconfigure your your response to a power supply type of device. Basically, you're going from, because you can't use under the regulation gasoline generators, you got to revert to propane generators. And you have to reinvest on the support systems and the support resources or assets to bring it into compliance. Lost revenue. I mean, anytime you have a power safety shutoff, you have the potential of losing additional customers that you may want to add on to your subscription base. But at the same time, you're taking away from the maintenance of our techs maintaining the system and making sure it's 99.9% up and running. So there'll be a revenue loss there. So with that, I think, Derek, I went through what I need to do and pass it off to Bob.
Yeah, that was great follow-up to Jesse and Jennifer's, and it really does. I love the way the storyline comes together with Joe leading off with the government, big bodies that we do work with, to the theoretical and the problematic challenges of climate change, to getting practical on the ground with dealing with this information and this challenge of lack of power. I mean, the other hat that I wear with the industry is the Energy 2020 program, which I'll just put a brief plug in. We have a session on that update tomorrow at 4:30. And the importance of power. And without power, we're really, we have to have that to provide the service that everybody depends on. So Tom, excellent way to set the stage and provide that overview. So without further delay, let me welcome Robert to the stage to talk about, okay, how we have all these challenges, how are we going to prep for them and deal with them? So without further delay, Robert, please take us away.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you to my colleagues beforehand. My name is Robert Whitteman. I'm the Senior Director of Broadband Services for the EnerSys Corporation. One of the things that I'm going to be doing today is taking what Jesse talked about, Tom talked about, what Jennifer talked about, and actually putting it together into some solutions and options for this long duration outages. So with that, let me get into the presentation. As both Jesse and Jennifer and Tom talked about, the California Public Utility, they came up with the 72-hour requirement. How did companies adapt to that? What did they have? What are the options that they had? The increase in the severe weather, Joe talked about it. Everybody's talked about Ida, the ice storms, the fires. What are the solutions that are out there? What are the pros and cons of them? Tom talked on a couple pros and cons of different solutions and where we're going. And I'm going to run through that in this presentation today. So Derek. So what are the challenges that we had out there today? When you take a look at the power plant that's out there today, it's a 3 to 4 hour backup. Well, if you think about it, the CPUC is 18 times what we currently have today. You have to come up with an option or solutions to how do we quickly increase 18 times the backup that we planned for? What's the existing design and limitations? You can see in the pictures here, the cabinets are relatively small. And then Tom also talked about the municipalities, the space, the aesthetics, the permitting. What are we all running into when we're trying to come up with a design? Can we make it bigger? Can we make it larger? Do we have to go in ground, as Jesse and Jennifer talked about? Can you go above ground? Where are you going with it? The residential impacts. And then as Tom was talking about, as these notifications come about, how much time do you have to prepare for that 72-hour outage? Well, when this requirement came about, we had to come up with this designs that didn't exist. We had to come up with cabinets that didn't exist and really design something to meet the requirement. And I believe, Tom, today was the first day, October 11th, I believe it went into play, was the first time. In fact, I believe there was an event today where it required some deployment the other day. So that timeline to meet the requirement was in place. And then what do you do if you don't have a permanent solution yet? What's the temporary solutions? And then if you have temporary solutions, well, how do you deploy them? How do you maintain them? And there are all the challenges that we ran into as we're coming up with solutions for these long duration outages. Next slide. So let's take a look at it. And you can hit it again for me, Derek. Hit it one more time. Thank you. So what are the items to consider, right? You have the power requirements, the space limitations. To Tom's point, it's expensive. What's the cost availability? What do you have to design and change? How do you transport in short intervals? When you look at the solutions that are out there, Tom talked about lead acid batteries, talked about lithium, portable generators. Tom mentioned about having propane versus gasoline. You can have larger generators as well, permanent generators. You can have generators that are on site that are piped in solutions with natural gas. But they all have their pros and cons, and you got to take a look at what's the best solution for your operation based on the cost, deployment, maintenance, and so forth. And the interesting thing that Jesse and Jennifer talked about really was the operation during climate change. You know, putting the plant underground, well, with all the floods, that's not a good solution. If you use propane tanks, when there's flooding, those propane tanks have a tendency to float down the flood water. So that's not a solution. So you really, to Jesse and Jennifer's point, you really got to think long-term, what's the right solution based on the climate conditions that are taking place and that are causing a lot of these decisions that are going on today. So in the next slide, we'll take a look at what are some of the solutions. Battery options. Tom talked about battery options. Today, it's lead acid batteries, and they go up to about 38 hours. Then you get into lithium with the longer run times that are now required, that 21 to 109 hours. You heard Tom talk about 6 to 7 days that it could possibly be on the requirement. Well, now you got to look at lithium. And the lithium today is a lot longer than 2 to 3 years. They do last a lot longer than that. But then now that requires a different design in the battery management system, in the cabinet, in the layout of it. So that's a design change. And how many more cabinets do you need? And then when it goes longer than that, now you got to come up with generators, whether they're permanent or portable. And what are you going to do to deploy these during the events? So everything varies based on the situation, the location, the options, and the requirements that you have for each carrier that are out there. But there are certainly some of them. When you look at generator options, you got the portable generators, and you can see in the picture here, portable generators bring you a lot of flexibility, depending on how you do it. You can see a large generator there can be pulled behind a F-150 or a 250, but think about that. That's one generator per truck that you're hauling out there. In another case, you can haul a trailer that could have anywhere from 24 to 54 portable generators inside that trailer. So you got to figure out what's the deployment, the transportation, and more importantly, the fuel. As Tom mentioned, these smaller ones are both propane and gasoline operated. And the one on the left, the larger one, is diesel. How well do you get the fuel? How do you get them refueled? What's the maintenance required behind them? Where are you going to store all of these? In California, I think there's over 4,000 sites that need to have some sort of solution. Are you going to have 4,000 generators? What's the solution to that? And these are certainly some options. A standby generator or stationary generator is certainly very good from a refueling standpoint. It's piped in, but the concern there is what happens if they turn the power off? Do they turn the gas off? Now that's a problem. What's the space? You can see it's a much bigger space. It may not fit in the location that you want to decide to go with this solution. And then the other thing is just having a site that actually has the possibility for gas to be piped in might not always be there. So again, the pros and cons: flexibility with a portable generator, long runtime with a stationary generator, and no refueling. Next slide. So when you take a look at what Tom talked about on the CPUC coverage area, it's over 1,000 miles north to south in California. You got 10 to 12 hours to get there, depending on when you had to get notification that there was an event going on. This past weekend, I believe we got notified on Sunday to get the generators deployed for that event. So you have to stage. If you got 4,000 opportunities to deploy a generator, where are you going to put them? Now you got to stage them. Now you got to find a place to stage them. And how are you going to get them out there? It's almost like Amazon delivering generators in 72 hours. How fast can you get them out there? The driver availability. And then when you have the generators out there, if the power's out, you have to worry about the theft of the generator for the homeowner is going to take that generator and use it for themselves. So there's a lot of things that go along with coming up with a solution. And going by what Jesse and Jennifer talked about, this is just showing California. What about Texas and Florida and all the other states that they showed where the temperature are rising? How many more of these options and solutions need to come up with to take care of those events in the years out, in the 10 to 20 years and beyond, as they showed in their map? So all these things need to be considered when coming up with options. Next slide. The portable generators give you great flexibility. It gives you the ability to pull out there and deploy them. The trailers can be 20 foot, 40 foot, but they limited runtime. And the smaller the generator, now you might have, to Tom talked about 6 to 7 days, but these generators may only run 9 to 20 hours. So now what about the refueling of all of them? What fuel do you take out there? Are you taking miniature propane tanks? Are you taking gasoline? Now you got to consider all those options with that particular choice as well. Next slide. Hit it for me a couple times there, Derek. So in conclusion, there's a lot of different solutions that are out there. Lithium is the latest solution. I believe Toby Peck's going to talk in depth about the lithium solution later on this week during his event. The lead acid batteries, the new TPPL versions, the larger generators we showed, future emerging technologies. What else is next? What else, could you put underground in case of a flood, or where do you need to put it up above? There's all kinds of different situations. Everything's unique. It's got to be adapted to the desires of the customer based on total cost of ownership, availability, and just really, what's it going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years from now? So I'm not saying any one solution is the right solution. There are multiple ways to get to your destination. And this just gives you some ideas of how the various MSOs have taken to coming up with a solution for the CPUC and then for climate change events. So Derek, I think that finishes it up. It leaves us 15 minutes, I guess, for questions.
That's right, Robert.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for that awesome overview on some solution sets to consider, depending upon your situation. It's not a one size fits all, as you alluded to. So thanks again. At this time, we're going to stop the screen share and allow for us to go into roundtable and end with a few questions. We do have about 15 minutes left. I have a couple questions in the queue here. Starting, I think I want to start with Jesse and Jennifer, because it's certainly a provocative topic around the you left us with a lot of questions around climate change and got us thinking. But can you, offer a recommendation or tools that you would think would be helpful in helping address and prepare for the changes that are looming and we're seeing in this day and age? Don't forget to come off of mute.
Yeah, specific tool, that would be interesting to see if they have any like off-the-shelf tools, but I know Jennifer can probably speak to this 10 times more intelligently than I can, but Jennifer, actually, do you want to jump in on the GIS approach?
Yeah, so when you think about the climate modeling, right, and the graphic that we shared from AccuWeather, that's kind of a geotemporal, right? So it's time and space in itself. And so when you think of a GIS or a graphing intelligence system from a geographical perspective, you want to be able to map your assets over those impacts, right? So you can truly see down to the zip code level what those potential impacts are, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and when you're talking about your tools and your assets, obviously there's things within our network and things within our plant that will only last 5 years. It'll only last 15 years, right? Things have different shelf lives, if you will. So if you're able to kind of tie in all of those internal applications that you have into a mapping tool from climate modeling, you can look at those, in that relative space over that relative period of time. So that's just one of the tools that you can use. Most MSOs and telecommunications or those in the communications industry have the mapping tool available. So now it's just tying in what they like to consider the analytics or those data modelings that a lot of companies provide. A lot of that data modeling does come in very kind of no easier way other than to put it in stale, dry Excel spreadsheets, right? But that really doesn't help your engineers and your planning folks look at the way in which they're used to looking at. So if you have tools that you can kind of pair or marry that data together, that really helps folks look long-term.
That's great. I think having a takeaway like that helps people sleep a little bit better. And knowing that there are resources out there and it's not just a bunch of questions that we're going to address as a team. I think that's a really great challenge. Again, carry on with this particular topic, Tom. Do you see this the public safety shutdown is largely impacting California? Do you think there's an opportunity for this to grow beyond California? I know there might be rumors of maybe Oregon or Washington or Texas.
Yeah, there's pending regulations or discussions, public notices, whatever you want to call them, in Oregon, in Washington State. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it in the Colorado, Arizona area, and even Nevada. As the, I mean, if you looked at the number of wildfires we've had over the last, 2 years or so, I mean, you're talking about in the hundreds, if not thousands, different wildfires. So at the same time, I think, some states like this, the Northeast and Vermont, they may be looking at some type of regulation also. So yes, they would. I think it's going to spread throughout the country over the next 5 years. Some type of regulation, powers, public safety, power shutdowns.
So it's great that we're getting ahead of this now and getting some things in a row, so we're ready to deal with a larger impact of that kind of program. Joe, that leads me to your question. When dealing with this kind of stuff, how does government prioritize assistance to an industry like ours? Is there any insight that you can offer with dealing with the government folks?
Yeah, so again, it's public safety, right? Most people, even like myself, I don't have a home phone. We utilize our cell phones, right? So you have to have the ability for somebody to place a 911 call, right? So that's a huge emphasis is placed on the wireless industry. The last few years, we have worked very hard to educate our government partners on the role that cable plays, the important role that cable plays in the whole ecosystem in terms of providing cell tower backhaul, providing circuits. It's a very interconnected communications architecture and infrastructure across the United States. To complete circuits, we buy circuits from other companies, they buy circuits from us. So it's extremely important for us to continue to educate our local, state, and federal government authorities about that. But I will tell you that the wireless industry is under enormous pressure to make sure that their infrastructure comes back quickly from a public safety perspective.
And they depend and work with us because we do so much of their backhaul. So we're kind of like bolted on there. So it's in our best interest to keep tabs on that. Absolutely. And that leads me to Robert. You guys have deployed, hundreds of gens and batteries and such to help support efforts like this. A question that came to mind around supply chain. How is, with the COVID and the pandemic, there's everything's being impacted by lead times, lag times for getting key assets where and when it's needed. What's your insight on dealing with the CPUC and maybe supply chain, either troubles or insights on the critical assets that you covered?
So from a generator standpoint, the various MSOs kind of planned it ahead of time that you were able to get the generators. So I know in Tom's case, they got all the generators. I know in Joe's case, most of the generators have been delivered and are available. As far as the lithium technology, that's a little bit further down the road. So that's why there is a temporary solution where they're using the generators in the meantime to overcome when the lithium product is going to be available. In those sizes that are smaller than the lead acid product is available today. So it depends, right? It always comes back to that question. It depends. It depends on the load on the outside power plant and which ones can take what's currently available and then what ones would be down the road.
So your mileage will vary. That's
Yes.
an important takeaway there. Well, in light of the time, we are the last session of the day here for our day one opening of Cable-Tec Expo 2021. I want to thank all of our panelists and really my team. I mean, working with Jim and crew is a true delight, and we meet every other Wednesday as part of our ANSI accredited standards. Every other Friday for our ANSI accredited standards program as the working group, 1 o'clock Eastern time. So if you're interested in that and you're a standards member, please reach out to me. Be glad to talk more about getting involved with the business continuity planning and development that the team really zeroes in on. We have our site set for the next 12 months. We typically run around Expo as our flagship event, and we love to highlight annual updates on critical, timely topics such as what we covered today. So again, thank you to the team. I want to also thank the production crew for helping us get this organized, and as well as all of you who are attending today. And it has been here on Zoom for hours on end, and hopefully you got to stretch, got some food, got some fresh air, and got a lot out of our sessions because it's just day one. So hang on tight, there's a lot more to come. And with that, I will say thank you very much. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care, team.
Thank you.